Welcome to the Fran Snyder Podcast, where I talk to artists and music fans to explore how music connects us through great stories and experiences. Brought to you by the Listening Room Network. Today's guest, John Jaeger of Music at Chateau Belvedere. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Fran. Yourself?
Great. It's finally great. It's great to finally see your face. We've been chatting sort of off and on for years.
Yes.
Just to share with our audience, most of our podcasts are with artists. I guess you so far are the rare exception where we're actually talking with a house concert host. But I think it's not only interesting to share the other side of the whole house concert thing, but also it gives just I don't know, some of my favorite podcasts have been the few that we've done with house concert hosts, because it really shares aspects of this whole culture that you may not know about. So I'm eager to learn a little bit more about your story and to share it with our audience. So John, tell me, I guess, first of all, you know, a little bit about your background, a little bit about where you are and how you became such a music fan that you wanted to have house concerts in your home.
Okay. So I'll just start out by saying I listen to music 5 or 6 hours a day, in addition to, you know, in the old days of being in an elevator and hearing it there, or going out to a bar and hearing it in the background or something like that. So I do listen to a fair amount of music, and I have a fairly eclectic reach. There are certain things that I'm not interested in listening to, that they're just, I have no personal interest in it. And so, but I do consider myself fairly wide-ranging in what I like. My business is my background is business-oriented. I never was a traveling musician, although I have family members who were traveling musicians for many years. And seeing what they went through and realizing it hasn't changed that much since the 70s, which is the shocking thing. Once I was introduced by a third family member to house concerts, it really took me over as an opportunity for me to do a few things. One is help musicians out, because I love musicians, I love music, and I think the plight that the music industry is under, and particularly singer-songwriters, you know, it's just very difficult for them. So that's one of the reasons. The other reasons is I like to introduce artists to people who would never have an opportunity, most likely, to hear them or see them in person. And I think that's great for the audience, and I think it's great for the artists. And so those are the two primary reasons that I got into this in the first place. And I have a sister who has been attending house concerts for, I don't know, probably 25 years. And she kept talking about these house concerts and these, you know, got to go to the house concert. And I just couldn't imagine sitting down listening to somebody play the bassoon for 3 hours. You know, you know, that was my vision of what was going to happen.
Now, was she into classical music? Is that what gave you that notion?
No,
or
I was ignorant. Yeah. You know, I had no idea. And I also thought that the talent of whatever the music was going to be poor.
Right.
I just didn't know. And I know that's the reaction of many of the people who are invited to house concerts. They thought, yes, you know, how good can this possibly be? The person is willing to play at your house, you know? So, the first concert that she got me to go to was a Liz Longley concert. And
that's a great intro.
And Liz is very well known here in the Washington, D.C. area. And she is just a delightful person, has become a very good friend. She sometimes will stay at our place when she's traveling from one place to another and not have anything to do with concerts at our house. And we have a number of friends people who have become friends who do that on occasion. And I think that's another good advantage for them, but we can come back and talk about that later. But, you know, having seen her in person, and in a house concert setting where it's very intimate. And you could see how much the artist appreciated being there, which surprised
And how intimate was this particular show? Like, how many people would you say?
The very first show was probably 20 people packed into a room that could handle 15.
Yeah.
With a little itty bitty stage and a very small little speaker. And she just did such a bang up job. I've since probably seen her play 20 times, since then, in all kinds of venues, from relatively big ones to, to my house.
Yeah, that would be an amazing intro to see Liz Longley at your first one. Yeah. So you mentioned something, I want to backtrack just a little bit, because you said something that in my mind was, on the surface, was controversial. You said you're amazed at how music hasn't changed since the 70s. Now, I can tell you a million reasons why that's wrong, but I have a sense of what I know what you mean. But I'd like for you to sort of elaborate. What hasn't changed
what hasn't changed is that musicians get paid very little. We in this world have hundreds of thousands, maybe probably millions of very talented musicians, singer-songwriters, bands who we'll never see, we'll never hear of. And my family has musicians who traveled back in the 70s and early 80s, making $250 a show and going to places like Albany, New York to Austin, Texas in a bus that breaks down 3 times to get there. They get paid $250. Well, that hasn't changed.
Right.
If you are an artist in Nashville, and I'm not going to use any names, but you're playing for a pretty big name in country music, and you're the lead off act, you get paid generally $250. Yeah. And if you get paid more than that, you have to bring an accompanist, guitarist or rhythm or some other person that costs you at least half of what you're going to make. So maybe you get $400 or $500, but then you have to give that to the other person. You have to pay for their night in a hotel. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
And you have to manage that person, and they might get a better gig, and you got to get a sub at the last minute. And
and it's not only the fact that they're getting $250 still. It's that, well, we could get into a discussion about minimum wage, but we don't need to do that. That also hasn't gone up for a really long time.
Sure, but I think another thing that's lost is, like, even if you're making $1,000 a show, that's $1,000 for your business. That's not $1,000 for you. And a lot of people forget that an artist might have spent 40 hours booking that 2-week tour.
Correct.
They've probably invested hundreds of dollars or hours in marketing that tour. Mm-hmm. Not to mention getting there and dealing with cancellations and all this kind of stuff. My next podcast right after this one is with Jeremy Facknitz, and he's going to talk about how he had a tour up in Canada. He drove all the way to Canada to do this 10-day tour, and one day into it was COVID.
Oh boy.
And I'll let him tell the story. I want to go into all the details, but it's just like, that's what you face as an artist. And certainly there's lots of traveling salesmen out there. There's other jobs that are prone to catastrophes, but there's something unique about how little artists make and how vulnerable they become when adversity hits, like a broken down bus and that kind of thing. So
hard to imagine making $250 after all of the effort that you've gone through. Mm-hmm. And then you also have to pay for a night in a hotel, or sleep on a friend's couch, or sleep in your car or your van, which many of them do, especially if they're bringing animals with them sometimes.
That happens surprisingly often.
That's right, yeah. We allow them in our house, so it's okay, as long as they're not horses. Although we did allow a horse into our house during one house concert. Whole nother story. So, it's that was for a charity. We hooked up a charity that does writing for special needs children and or people, and then had a house concert. And we had them come in, and they had a little pony that had these things on its feet, and everybody got to pet the pony, and they talked about their charity before we had the house concert, which turned out to be great. It's a good way to connect with your community in a deeper way, and you're bringing it all together with music, which is so cool.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned when I started doing interviews a couple years ago, because I started writing a book about house concerts. It's still not finished, but I was pleasantly surprised by the number of intangibles that hosts get from hosting concerts. You mentioned briefly some of the friendships that you make with artists, but one of the things I noticed, of course, is by promoting these shows, you're forcing yourself to reach out to your friends more often, to reach out to new people in your community. And so you intensify and nurture a lot of your friendships that might have been sort of withering or dissipating. You also connect with new people. You elevate your status in the community. And some hosts even, they find new clients. They meet people that become not only good friends, but, customers of their business. And I mean, that's not the reason to have house concerts, but it's amazing the number of intangibles that hosts get from this seemingly generous gesture of helping artists. I mean, obviously it is generous, but I was surprised and pleasantly so by the number of great things that hosts report that they get out of this.
Yeah, I mean the relationships it is the biggest benefit to me that I feel I derive from it with the artists. But certainly, I get to see some of the people that I don't see that often around our neighborhood because of the house concerts. They make a point to come to 2 or 3 a year. So that's been a big bonus. I think we might get to this at some point, but it's a good segue now. For house concert hosts, it gets difficult. You're asking the same people to come and do the same thing for a different artist, and do so with generous hearts, and open up their pocketbooks and come out of their house, which, I stopped doing weekday concerts because I couldn't get anybody to leave their house during the week. They come in, before COVID, they'd come home from work, they'd have dinner, they'd have a drink, and that's it. They're ready to spend the rest of the time on the couch. And, it's having concerts on Saturdays. Well, then now the artist has to choose between, do I go to, this venue, this bar, this listening room, or do I do this house concert? And I know listening rooms includes house concerts, but there are businesses now which are fairly large listening rooms.
Commercial venues. Yeah.
Commercial. Yeah. And they have to make that decision, which is best for their career. And I found that I've been able to get most of them to come to mine. So I feel very blessed by that. But it wears down on you asking the same people. So I do reach out. Every time I go to a concert, I must collect the contact information of 5 or 6 people that I don't know, that I talk to about the fact that I do house concerts. And, I have this amazing talent that we're watching tonight on stage at my house. And they're like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you are enjoying this podcast, can you pause for a moment to like, review, and subscribe? Please help the world discover our music community and the wonderful artists we support. Your feedback makes a difference. Let me take this to something you sort of hinted at earlier. And it really just, for me, it dovetails so nicely with coming out of the pandemic and wanting to still be safe and be, to err on the side of safety as we, start eventually having events indoors again. One of the things that was very important to me 10 years ago was figuring out ways to inspire hosts to do stuff during the week. And the biggest resistance was this feeling that I can't get enough people to come to my house on a weeknight, which is what you just explained.
Yeah.
And part of that you establish this baseline by doing weekend shows, and your capacity might be 40 or 50 or 60. And for you, once you've done enough larger shows, it's hard for you to understand how meaningful a smaller show would be if it was on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night.
Yeah, I struggle with that.
Yeah, and it's very, very common. And the thing that I really just love to repeat and try to find ways to inspire people to get this is that, as an artist, everybody wants you on the weekend. That's the easiest nights of the week to fill. But especially with the intangibles that come from house concerts, when you're throwing in lodging and an audience that the artist didn't have to market to bring to the show. So you're, again, throwing in lodging and maybe planting seeds for a bigger show in the future. Like, hey, but the idea is that having 20, 25 people on a Tuesday, Wednesday night is better than 90% of artists can get at any commercial venue. And any night that they're not playing when they're on the road, they're losing money. So when you factor all those things in, and the idea that, yes, you can't get 50 people at your house on a Wednesday night, but you might get 25, especially if you're intentionally small. You can say, listen, guys, you're part of my mailing list. Like, you don't reach out to everybody, or at least you pretend not to. And you say, listen, I'm inviting a select number of people to this event. I'm only allowing 25 people.
Right.
And you establish that with the artist. Listen, I'm going to do an exclusive thing. This is how you're getting a Wednesday at my place.
Right.
And you might do this with an artist that, you feel is awesome, but they're up and coming. And frankly, you don't yet want to put in the work of getting 60 people in your home for this artist. There's all kinds of reasons. But for me, the thing that dovetails so well with what we're dealing with in terms of the pandemic is that, if you're used to having 50, 60 people in your home, that's going to be uncomfortable even on a Saturday, because we're not fully out of the pandemic yet. There's still going to be this lingering thing of like people not wanting to be closed in and so intimate as they were before. So the idea for me is that, using this landscape of what we're dealing with now in terms of people not wanting to be smashed together in a tiny room, to say, you know what, that room that you did 60 people in before will be perfect for 35 people now. Mm-hmm. And artists are in a position now where they're going to be more willing to take that deal just to reestablish touring again. And with the connective tissue that we're trying to build on the website. So they're not booking one show at a time, but eventually 2, 3, 4 shows, because hosts will be collaborating. So again, it's not a hard sell, but I wanted to use this time with you to just kind of, because you're a perfect example of someone who has that possibility. If they can wrap their head around the idea of like, yes, an artist actually will be grateful and everybody will have an amazing time with 25 people in the room. Right.
Yeah. Well, so that is 100% true. And it's also 100% true that I personally struggle with it. Mm-hmm. And I struggle with it because the smallest house concert I ever had was my first 2. They were both right around 45 or 50 people. Mm-hmm. My average house concert is about 65, and many have been right close to 100. Yeah. So I have a big place, whether we do it indoors or whether we do it outdoors. When I built a house, I had a stage built in the basement. I've got lights. I've got a great sound system. Some people say it's the best place they've ever played before. So, and plenty others not. So it's very hard for me to say, gosh, I'm gonna go through the trouble it takes to have one of these. It's not easy. You know, there's a lot you have to do. You have to promote it. You worry about the list. You worry about the weather in the winter time. So I had stopped having winter concerts. Yeah. I'm going to not do that next year. When COVID comes out, I'm going to try to do concerts. And I think I will try to do smaller concerts and just recognize if I collaborate with the other hosts in the area and there's somebody they've got coming that seems like they would go well for me and my audience, and I'm only going to get 15 people. Then maybe it's still worth doing. It certainly is worth doing for the artists
on a weeknight. Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing that you always have to remind hosts is that, I don't want to play for 20 people on a Saturday night. You're
Right.
absolutely dead correct about that. Absolutely. But on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and sometimes even Sunday night or a Sunday brunch concert before I do something else that night, the idea that I could be holed up at a Best Western somewhere, just like, okay, we couldn't find a gig tonight.
Right.
And here we are at the Best Western and we're dropping $100 on the room and money on food.
Yeah.
And, and once in a while that's great because you got to catch up on business or whatever. But too often artists are doing 3 shows a week instead of 5 a week.
Right.
And that's what makes touring almost impossible. And that's why artists have trouble, making enough money to get management so that they, or tour support or those things that help them get to the next level. They're always just scrambling just to survive. Yeah. So that weeknight opportunity is just something that I'm really going to be pounding the table about this year, because it just this is such a great opportunity for people to downsize in a way that makes sense, in a way that makes their audience feel more comfortable. And instead of thinking of it as a small concert, think of it as an exclusive concert. Think about how special how special you felt having seen Liz Longley with 20 people, because you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, it's 100 people plus, or maybe 65 or 70 at your place, but generally, she's not going to play tiny places anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just something that I especially for people like you who have the capacity to do large shows, you've got this thing in your heart. You want the artist to make as much money as possible, and it's just it just fights your soul to think of doing a small thing. But those small things, I can only
do 4 or 5 of those a year,
yeah,
because it's a lot of work. And your typical house concert, which they are fantastic. They do so much for the artist. Almost everybody that I've ever talked to supplies room and board for them for the night. Sure. Dinner and breakfast are an amazing thing for people who are trying to save every penny that they can get.
And just getting a home cooked meal on the road. So
no, it's just one of those things where for me, I want all the money to go to the artist. So, a lot of times I ask everybody to bring a plate, and in most places it's bring your own booze. I provide the beer and wine, and because I can afford to do that, I get all of the money. All the money goes to the artist. And then I ask a lot. I've only done 2 concerts since COVID hit. Both were scheduled to be outdoors. And I had one where I asked everybody to pitch in, $50 a head, which was higher than I've ever asked them to do before. But again, I said, it's exclusive. It's going to be small. It's going to be outdoors. I had it all set up so nobody was closer than 10 feet to any other small group of cohabitants. And then I did another one where I asked for $100 a person, and I had to move it indoors. I was going to do 40. Had to move it indoor, had to move it down to 32.
Yeah. Well, hey, let me add just one more shade of color to this, because again, for me, finding a way to overcome this idea that it's going to be less special because it's smaller. The other thing, so I live in an apartment in downtown St. Petersburg. My max capacity is 16 people.
Yeah.
But because of that, about half of the artists choose to play Unplugged. And for them and for the audience, the idea of hearing that natural sound where there's no amplification, I mean, it's just beyond intimate. That's another thing that's another way to sort of sell this idea is this is going to be so exclusive. The artist is going to do it totally unplugged. And that's not something and that's not something that you for me, as an artist, I can only do that if there's 2 rows. Once you get to the 3rd, 4th row, I don't feel like the sound gets far enough and there's not enough impact.
Yeah.
But when you got 20 people sort of spread out around you, and there's really nobody that's having to listen through 2 rows of people in front of them, that really creates an opportunity for these unplugged moments that are just so special. The idea that for me as an artist, I can walk around, I can lean over here. I don't have to be on the mic every time I talk. I can go over here and whisper to somebody or whatever. So anyway, that's just another shade of it, is just the idea of like, it can, some artists will actually be thrilled to play Unplugged. Not all of them, but some of them will. So that's another opportunity.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about when you first started hosting. What were some of the obstacles for you? Like, because you obviously now, I don't know if you've done it this way the entire time, or if you grew into providing alcohol and all the food yourself, or the potluck thing. Tell me how it evolved. Tell me first of all, like, when you thought about hosting a house concert, what was your biggest reason not to? What did you have to overcome to say, yeah, this is going to work. I'm going to do this?
Yeah, that actually didn't happen until after I'd had a couple. Then I was like, what am I doing? This is a lot of work.
Okay.
And it is a lot of work for all the people who are, potential hosts who might be seeing this, now or in the future. It is a lot of work, but it's well worth it. And the thing that really got me over the top of that was being prepared for the what ifs. So what if I have a concert in February and nobody shows up because suddenly we got ice on the roads? Maybe the artist made it and maybe they didn't. I always worry about the artists getting here. They're being hung up because there's a big accident on the road, and what time are they going to arrive? And there's a lot of added stress because of those particularly environmental things that can happen, things you have no control over. So I try to get them here at 4 p.m. for the 7:30 concert, and they get the sound check done and all of that. But there was nothing in the beginning. When I was in, I was all in. And, then I figured a few things out. And, I went from 8 concerts my second year back down to about 5. And that's typically what I do now, just because it's a lot. I have to reconcile with my mind, particularly coming out of COVID. I can help more people rather than only a few with bigger money, by having just a few of those bigger concerts and maybe hooking up with other hosts and making, really getting a tour here in the area where people can, where artists can touch the lives of hundreds of people here, rather than they're coming through here, then they go to Baltimore, then they're up in Delaware, and then they're in New York City, and, they're having to travel every single day. So I have to wrap my mind around that. I have to see how I can execute it and what I will do differently. Because then maybe it's a different situation. Maybe it's just a concert and dessert, which is one of the things that you used to quite often, give as an option for hosts to attract people to their houses and to keep the time and expense and all of that sort of thing a bit under control. So,
yeah, we call that dessert and song. And that was like, hey, go home, have dinner after work, whatever. And then come over, have dessert. And it's a 1-hour show instead of like a whole night. So you can still get home in time to check email and check your Robinhood account before you go to sleep. So
that's a Bitcoin.
I'm telling you. With all the time off this year with the Listening Room Network, I've been into Bitcoin for a couple of years, but this year I really leaned in hard. So to finish up, I guess there's 2 things I want to mention. Number one is, and this, as a person in our network, especially when the pandemic hit, this whole network of hosts and these people who care about artists really became like more than a safety net. I mean, I got reports from artists saying, holy crap, like, how are you going to survive? Like, what are you going to do? So hosts are reaching out to artists even before the artist said, we don't know what to do. Please help us. Right. There were all these proactive hosts in our network who were reaching out to artists. What can I do to help? And so it was wonderful to me to see this network sort of blossom as this safety net for hard times for artists. It's just a wonderful thing. And as the year went on, I became increasingly convinced, because so many commercial venues are going out of business, the house concerts are going to have to lead the way. They're going to have to lead the recovery in music, at least for small independent acts, which is what we cater to. And so, I think it's going to be really critical for all of us to be able to share how wonderful this hobby is, so we can get new people, because there, you know, frankly, the pandemic has basically taken some hosts out. They're never coming back.
Yeah.
You know, like just like, okay, it was difficult to begin with. We're getting up there in years, and too many of our friends are getting up there in years, and everybody's afraid. And there's all kinds of reasons to not do house concerts, as you know. But to have a little fun with role play as we finish out here, pretend that I'm a music fan. We just met at a party, and you feel that I would be a really good candidate to start hosting house concerts. Tell me why I should pick this up as a hobby, you know, from how fun it is and what it's done for you personally over the years.
Yeah. Fran, can you imagine having an opportunity to have this person that we're watching tonight come to your house, have a meal with you, maybe a couple meals with you, play a concert, talk about your venue to other people, and suddenly you would have people reaching out to you instead of you reaching out to them. But that relationship that you gain from having music in your home and the way that it will touch the lives of other people, it's really pretty amazing. And you seem to be that you'd be the kind of guy who would be interested in that.
Awesome.
To do it.
Thanks, John. It's great to spend all the time with you. I guess to wrap up, I just want to say thank you for all you've done so far, and you know, being just a really shining example of what's possible with music fans deciding to play a role in this ever shifting music industry. So thanks again.
I agree with you. We're going to need it more than ever now, just trying to get out of this. And although I do mostly small independent acts, well, pretty much everybody's independent these days. There really aren't record labels to really support musicians. And when they do, they try to take everything. But whole nother podcast on that.
Yes, the 360 deal. We get all parts of it.
Yeah. But you know, having the opportunity to touch a lot of lives that's meaningful to me. And I think if you're that kind of person, you know, then this is a great thing for you to do for your community and for outside, you know, for the artists who are the troubadours, I call them, who are out there traveling the world. And I encourage anyone who's even slightly thinking about it to do it.
Thanks, John. Well, have an amazing spring. Do keep us posted as to how your series picks back up, and I look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Right. Okay.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Fran Snyder Podcast. Please subscribe, like, or share to help your friends discover this community. Also, I'd love to hear from you with any feedback or suggestions you have. And if you'd like to learn more about house concerts and listening rooms around the world, please visit and join listeningroomnetwork.com. You can email me from there. See you next time on the Fran Snyder Podcast.